Hi, this is Maggie, and we are working on our November-December challenge, Sew Along, Digitizing an In the Hoop Basket. Now, in this video, I'll be showing you the step-by-step how to do it. It's okay if you have no clue other than how to find and open your software. You can come into our Facebook group for any questions you have. There'll be a link in the comments on this video. Now, the other thing you should be aware of is that I show you my steps on a Mac computer, but if you have a PC, the commands are the exact same. And if you're not familiar, if you're so new you can't find the commands, just ask us in the Facebook group and we'll give you a screenshot and show you how to go through these steps. Again, they're going to be the same regardless of which program you're in. Now, what I do first is I actually, because I know what I'm doing here with an in the hoop, I have my dimensions and I'm going to copy them and I'm going to paste them into notes so that I don't have to be going back and forth about what was that and what is this and whatever. And I just hit the little pencil anytime you want to edit something, and there I go. Now, to get started, the front and back are 5 inches long by 7 inches long by 5 inches high. So what we're going to do is create a rectangle. And you can choose to use a fill on the basket that we've sewn. I've used the quilt stipple fill, but you could use any fill you like. And I use a running stitch. I may go to double when we sew the parts together, but for just this quilting and outline, I go with the running stitch to keep it simple. Under options for fill area and line, the quilt stipple fill, 5 millimeters, and that is what I did on the basket. I did not change it. So we'll just go, okay, that works for me. Now you go into your shapes and you choose a square, and then you place the square. And because I want inches for part of it, I've got a 3.5 there. I'm going to go to Digitizing, Preferences, and I'm going to change my grid size to 1 inch. And you'll see I use the inch symbol of the double quotation. And there we go. And now I know that I want it to be 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by 5. Can line it right up there. And the thing to know about making this in inches is that the program, when we saw it, I'll go back here, gave me 25 millimeters, and an inch is actually 25.4 millimeters, and that's why, if you were to say, but this is 8 inches, you've got a little bit on either side. This is to make up for the fact that it was rounding down for the millimeters. Now, for the basket, I am also working in the 360 hoop. So let's get the hoop to the right size. And again, to do that, I click on hoop. I pick my size. This is in universal. Usually I go with Husqvarna Viking. I had reset all modules so you would have the same screen as me, and the Designer Royal hoop. I just like it looking like my hoop. What can I say? Some people always use universal. So there's the first piece, and when we make a basket, when it's the front, you'll want this blank so you can put your own image in there. You can actually, if you're making the quilting the same color as your background, you can usually stitch a design right on top of the quilting. I used to do that all the time. You don't have to go into Quilt Block Wizard and go around it. It isn't going to throw your stitches off. But I like how Quilt Block Wizard will give me a nice little outline that seems to make the design pop more. So I do that, and we'll do that in later steps, because actually the front and the back of the basket are almost the same, except that we're going on one piece to have the top piece, and on the second piece we're going to be stitching that onto the top. So one file will be front and one will be back and one will have more stitches in it. But for now, we'll be creating everything the same. So I have my 5x7, and then I need about a 3.5x5. And basically, you've got 1, 2, 3, and a little more than a half. It's basically that I filled the hoop because I wanted the basket as big as it could be. And before I want to make sure this guy comes all the way out to the 5. That's good. Just nudging it a little bit. So the next one is just going to be the same setup. Place your square. It's going to be over on this side. The bottom's the same. And what I do is I actually don't put these lines directly on top of each other because this is going to be a corner and I have some batting plus stabilizer or batting plus whatever it is I'm using. I know a lot of you aren't using the stabilizers I recommend, but I really have been using some stiff stuff. I like it to have two lines that are close to each other, but not on top of each other to help make that corner a little bit easier to bend. And now the other thing we can do is when you're putting it together is use your zoom slider. I know some people prefer to go space whatever. I just zoom and I go, I want these to be close. I want the bottom to line up, but I don't want them on top. And it looks like the top is lining up close enough. Okay, and then I go back out. And I just need to copy. I did a Command C, and now I'll do Command V for paste, copy and paste. And if you are on a PC, it's Control C and Control V. It's the same commands, just slightly different key. There we go. So this would be one side, this would be the other side, and the sides are basically going to give you a box shape because they're about half of the center. And again, I can zoom in, and this one's coming a little bit on top. Oh, there we go. Bring it up, make sure the bottom lines are together. And I want this to come up. One more, I'm using my arrow keys to just nudge it slightly. And let's see how the top looks. Pretty good. And now I can bring it back out. And there you have a center, a side, and a side. And now we're going to do the bottom. Actually, I'm going to undo that. Command Z is undo. Command Z. And I had used Echo on my bottom, which you're going to have two bottoms sewn together, so it isn't going to be one big rectangle echo. I just liked it. And this is going to be the bottom. Here we go. Again, all the way down, close to the edge. I always have them in just a hair from the edge. And this looks like it needs to be a hair over. This one's over a little bit much. Okay, let's double check that on Zoom. Whoops, way too much. Way too much. Okay. That looks all right on either side and the bottom, but it's obviously below the hoop. Need to bring that up a little bit. Now bring it down a little bit. Okay, now it's inside the hoop. We've got a line there and they're right side by side. And I'm using my arrow keys to nudge just a hair. And that's pretty well lined up. There we go. So now you have front or back, half of a bottom, half of the side, and half of a side. Now when we sew it together, when you put your fabric in the hoop, you might want to put a little tape on this side and that side, because although we'll be stitching along here, you want a seam allowance. So you're not going to want to cut right at the edge. Same thing on the bottom. You won't want to cut at the edge. And now we're going to put fill off, new fill. And for the top, what we do is you put your fabric in face down. The fabric for the lining is going to come in on this face down, long side, and then we're going to stitch right across, and we can flip the fabric back over. So to do that, all we need is a line, and to make a line, we go into create mode. If we're going to do the lining, and to do the lining, we're going into create mode, we're going to create a line, and we're just going to place some points for this line, and I tend to make it not a full inch. Go right across, make sure it's straight. So for this part, maybe you want to go back into digitizing preferences and put yourself back to the 10 millimeter default or whatever you usually have your grid size at. And that way it's easier for you to check, is this line really straight? And it is. And now we're going to create a few more lines. When you create the line, you have to finish drawing the line. So you double click and click finish drawing the line, and then you will see it appears here in your film strip, just like all the other pieces. Now, if you decide later you want a different quilting, maybe you just want channel quilting, you right click on the piece, properties, and you can go to any quilting you want. If you wanted a radial fill, you could go to radial fill. Now I'm going to click undo on that, Command Z, because the other thing you can do, I don't know if you noticed the radial was only in the center, is if you change your quilting later, you can say global properties. Now this is also going to change the ones that say quilt stipple. And maybe we want to do multi-wave, and we want to open it up to be a little looser. I say okay, and then we have multi-wave fill for all the ones that were quilt stipple. It didn't change the echo because that was not quilt stipple. So when you do global properties, you're changing whatever this is to the next one of the same. And that actually is kind of nice because I didn't want this to change. Now I'm going to undo, and then we go back. I just wanted you to be aware of how you could change these things up. And the other things we're going to add onto this piece, and this is just so you don't make a mistake, we're just going to put some little lines here so when you're cutting it out, you know not to cut on the line that you want a seam allowance. And I just made a little click there, so what the heck. There, finish point area or line. And I just want to know that, of course this is only 10 millimeter, maybe you want a little bit more. This is just so you have a seam allowance, and it's just to give you a reminder not to cut. And we can, oops, we should have finished the line. Oh, it came up here. Sorry about that. I kept looking at the bottom going, where's my line? Put it back at the bottom. There we go. Now we can copy it, Command C or Control C, and we can paste it. And if you hear a little kitty whining in the background, he wants to go out. And he's not supposed to go out right now. And we just flip it. Let's see where we are. Oops, wrong way. There we go. And we've got that line to just remind us to give ourselves a seam allowance here. Now this is one complete side. If you're doing a design, you would put it in. And as I mentioned in the intro version, when we export this, you would paste your design in embroidery, and then you would make sure your design stitches first. The other thing is this, you could say this is the quilt block, back. You could stitch this first, and then we will duplicate it, file duplicate. And we are going to have a quilt block front basket. Ooh, I have a few baskets, so I'm going to call this one video. And now we are ready that you do not stitch anything across here, because this is the top opening to your basket and you will be stitching it closed. So other than putting the lining on here, we're not putting any line here. And this corner and this corner are going to be boxed. What we are going to do, and I'll add so we're going to stitch the sides. A lot of times with these stitching changes, a lot of times I like to use a color that I don't own and I'm not going to stitch with, and that way I know it's not going to come up in a design. And now I'm going to not have a fill, and because these are the stitches stitching the basket together, I'll go back to a double stitch, or back, I'll start with a double stitch. I had done a running before. And we are in create mode, and now we are going to, again, placing our points. We're going to stitch this, and we can say finish drawing the line, and it will leave us still in the space of creating lines. We're going to stitch this. Finish drawing the line. And stitch this. This one might be a little bit too far out. And we're going to finish point area line, and this one I'm going to bring in a little because I think he's a little on the outside edge. If you're ever not sure, you can always try preview, and if see, it will tell you it's too large. No. Now this one, I want to box up and I move them in just a bit. There we go. That one's in fine. And the bottom one could be a little bit lower. There. Now we go to preview, and it's still too big, so somebody's outside of the hoop. And I'm going to say, I think it's over here. Let's see. Yeah, this one's right on the line. Just nudge it in a little bit. Okay, and the bottom is all right, and that one's all right. In part, you can see this one has so much space, which is why the other one didn't. So what I can do is take the center and the side. On a Mac, I'm hitting Command, so I get both of them at once, and move them just a hair over. Just nudge it over a little bit, but keep it inside. I'm nudging away here. And then go over to where this joint is, and that's because I like these not to be on top of each other, just to give a little bit of a there we go. Let's see. And now, oh, it's still, somebody's outside of the hoop there. The side is okay. And now I think it's these two. I brought them up too high. So this is part of, some parts go really fast and then some things you end up fussing around with. Yep, I moved them too far over. Okay. And if you hear a little loud breathing, that's actually the cat, not me. He's come right up to the computer mic. Not bad. Let's still put this guy over a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to have to, the other thing is if you have it right where you want it and you still get that, I can hit Command A and every single thing I made in here lights up. And you can do Control A on a PC and that gives you the entire film strip, the entire hoop. I can take that, hit Option Shift, and just nudge it down a little bit. And then center it. And now, you'll see here we are. We have almost double lines on the places that are the corners. Now the other thing to know is when you do the first piece, I take it out of the hoop and I press this corner quite well, and I press that corner quite well, and I press between the bottom and the front quite well, and that way when I put it together it's a little bit easier to have these guys already able to bend. I'm gonna shut this down for a second, be right back, because we're gonna let that cat out. And now this has probably been driving some people batty, don't mind me while I get this in the hoop, is that I tend to put all my steps in and then I go back and worry about my stops or my thread changes. Now because I've heard some people with, what do you call it, the multi-thread machines have a hard time programming in stops separately, and although this would still be a thread change, so I'm not sure how that would help them. But I'm in the habit of, instead of putting stops in, I actually put thread color changes. So you can do either. You could put in a stop or a thread color change. What's going to happen is, it's okay if your front and sides and bottom all stitch if they're all the same color. Now maybe you have your bottom a different color. You can click on the one above. When you click, you can add a thread color change. I never use anything called gull. Put that in there, and now the bottom is going to be a different color. So when you're stitching your basket, perhaps you chose to put in another line and do a darker color for the very bottom of the basket. Perhaps it's the same color. It doesn't matter. Now for myself, I have been using the same fabric for the top and the bottom, so I did not put a color change here. And again, you can also see where this says stop. You could make a stop if you wanted. So I actually do not use this one. But once we get into the running stitches, I like to have a stop after every running stitch. And again, this is easy for me because I don't tend to use this thread, so that's okay. We are going to definitely want it to stop after it does this, but before the lining, because you're going to have to place your fabric down over this piece. Now, the other thing is, you'll notice I did not, if you were selling, people always have to put here's your stitching line. They put the line first, and then they tell people stop and put your fabric down, and then it stitches. I didn't do a stitching line, and if you think you need it, just click on it, copy, click on it, paste. Comes right beneath it. You would need to have another stop or color change, and then you would have the line saying, here's where you're going to need to stitch, and then the line. And now when you do that, what you want is this first one, especially when you're working with padding sometimes, and some of you might have made in the hoop things where you get one line, you stitch another one on top, but when you put everything right side out, you can see a few of your stitches because of the pull, say, of the padding, where the mark line, you see a few little running stitches right at your seam. So if I do a placement line, I always want it to be just a hair above the line that's going to stitch. And that way, because they did come right on top of each other, but now you shouldn't have, when you flip your lining back up, you should not see any of the stitches. So you will see some people, I've seen people who sell in the hoop who put them right on top of each other, and I've seen people who've been nice and smart and put it just a little bit that it's inside where the stitching is, because it's still good enough for the purposes. And again, I don't normally give myself this because I've got this line and I already know my fabric's going to be stitched in about 3/4 in. So if you looked at the earlier videos, not all the stitching lines are on there that people need. And again, I tend to use a thread color change instead of a stop, but since I don't use that stitch, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if these stitch right away, except that if you don't pull your fabric out of the way, because you just put a big piece of fabric going over the whole hoop and down, it's going to stitch, and you're going to flip it and roll it up so it's out of the way. So you definitely want, and again, I'll take pictures for the stitch out so you can see this. So it's okay if I realize I'm saying, we're going to do this and this and this and that, and you don't know. And actually, I'm going to pause and say I'll put a picture in here. The first video I did cover it a little bit, and I have some pictures, and I'll do more pictures for a stitch out, okay? But you should have watched the front video, the first video, and if you haven't, maybe you want to go back and see that, and it covers a little bit more about the lining. But at any rate, after you put this line, stitching your lining, you definitely want either a thread change or a stop. Again, I tend to do the thread changes, and I tend to always make them a different color in case somebody color sorts. And it's okay if these two stitch. The main thing is you want to get your lining out of the way, flip it out of the way, and then these two can stitch, because they're just reminding you, don't trim right up there. And when you take it off the hoop, you actually trim from here to here so that you have, you trim your corners basically. And now, after you do those two, you also want to stop, because then you're going to put your already done first piece that didn't have the extra stitching lines. You're going to want to put that on top, matching up your edges. You'll notice we have no placement. Since I fill up the hoop, it's really hard to do placement stitches, and basically kind of have to peel things back and look at the line. Some people take a pin from the bottom and stick a pin up and then make sure the top piece goes right on the pin, and they'll do 3 parts and then tape it and then pull the pins out of the way, because you don't want pins in the way of your machine. And again, that's part of the stitch out. Right now we're just in the digitizing. But once you've got your piece in and taped, you can go ahead and stitch the side and the bottom and the side without stopping. So you don't need another stop in here. And now you have enough stops or thread changes. And again, for me, I would rather have a thread change. And I don't know why. Some people love stops and some people love the thread changes. And now for the stop, I can click delete object and it's gone away. And now I always have thread changes in here and I know all my stops. And usually what I do for myself is I make notes. And it would say that, you know, thread one is going to stitch and quilt the front and sides. Let's see, it will tell you. I make notes because then you forget. You look at a design that you, whoops, I hit. You have to hit Option Return. And you have to make sure it's not selected or the whole thing would erase. So I put my notes here. You can put them other places. You can actually put them in if you do stops, but I like everything over in notes. It's just how I do it, and it's easier. Thread 1 is quilting top and sides. I always hit Enter instead of Option Return, so don't mind me. This will probably happen a few times. Thread 2 is bottom, Option Return. Thread 3 is lining attachment, Option Return. Oh, this is, I did placement. See, I never do placement. I just followed myself up. I'm going, what do I have to there? Thread 4 is wait a second. Ah, so you're not the lining attachment. You're the placement. So take that off. Get in here. Thread 3 is, give myself an Option Return. Placement. Whoops. Yeah, no, fine. Oop, caps lock. I know I hit something there. 4 is lining attachment. Thread 5 is the hot pink. So let's see, what is, because I've got, okay, there we go. I thought I had, there we go, yeah, lining attachments there. Option Return. Thread 5 is seam allowance, oops. Corner boxing, Option Return. 6 is stitching all together. Ooh, I can type, sure. And can kind of hit a delete there. Click OK, and now I have this all here to see. And if I want to see everything, the first one you automatically get created in Digitizing. I'm not a fan of that. The automated gives me the same as what I said. And there we go. Okay. So I've got my notes. I've got this. And now we would go to export these pieces. And again, oops. Now on the quilt block back, I didn't add in my thing. So we have a film strip here. I'm going to leave the bottom the same because I've already showed you how to do that. But before I do the top, I need to add in a color change. So I can just pick any old thing. And that's going to give me my stitch for the lining. And then after that, This is how I normally do it for myself. Again, if you need a few steps, you know yourself well enough. Do you need something? Do you need a placement stitch, or can you go, I can go 3/4 inch from the edge? And if you do that, maybe you need to give yourself a note that, you know, thread 2. See, I always hit enter. And here we go. Make sure you don't erase it, because half the time that's what I do. Option return. Thread 2 is for lining. 3/4 down top edge. Again, I think in inches, and for those of you who don't, I'm so sorry. And then thread 4 would be get the lining out of the way. You know, knowing me. Oh, thread 3, sorry about that. Option return. Thread 3, move lining out of way for seam notation or seam allowance. I have some notes, and that should help me not make mistakes. So we did put this, but know yourself. If you need to copy and paste this so you have a placement as well as the line, give yourself that. And there are the tabs, and now this is ready to go. So I always save, even though it's fine. And now when I export, oops, so I also made this one too big. Okay, Control A. Oh, you know what? Since I nudged the other one, the safer thing to do is now to just delete this baby. We're going to say delete, because we want the front and the back the same. So what we would do is when you're finally finished, and before I thought I was, but we nudged it around and we're not, is now that you're finished, you file duplicate. Since you know you're not moving these pieces around anymore. And now you can say quilt block back. Back basket video. It doesn't need the word copy. And here we are going to remove the stitching. And this means that we remove this side, the bottom, and the side, and we can remove that color bit. You want to remove those, delete object. And now you've got the quilt block back. And the thing to know is that we do the back first, and the reason I did the back first and then have you attach it to the front is that way if you make a little bit, if you're a little bit crooked, your front won't be crooked, your design and all this. It would be more that something is happening on the sides and the back if you don't exactly line up your sides. But it should be easy if you're patient with figuring out your sides. And because we duplicated, these are the exact same, and they should fit right on top of each other. So you really want to duplicate as your last step. And now we've got a front and a back. We can hit File Export. I tend to turn color sort off, even though I made everything a different color. It's just something I'm in the habit of doing. I keep it off in configure, but because I'm doing this for you guys, I had set all modules the same and lost all my settings, and I just don't do that. So it's going to save into the My Designs file as an export, and this one I can also go File, Export. Again, you don't have to because we set them separately. I've got a back and a front. So there we go for the digitizing piece. Then I'll put some more pictures together for the stitch out so you understand how it all goes together.